Since the other William Hooper counsel was modest, Mr. Isaiah, I think I'll share a little more details about Dr. Counsel, who was an education pioneer and an icon, not only who revolutionized this area, but also the state and the country. Picture of Dr. Counsel. But before integration, there was only, and you were an African American, there was only two high schools that you could attend, either William Hooper Counsel High or Counsel Training School. So even the city and the county thought enough about him as an individual to name the only schools blacks could attend after Dr. Counsel. We still see his name plastered all over our city. There's a Counsel Street right off Pulaski Pike where our dear Mother Holmes, the assistant pastor of the church, I actually live off Counsel Street. And if you go downtown to the Madison County Courthouse, there's this beautiful mosaic art piece. Everything that's historic in Madison County is encompassed in this piece. There's only two black features. One is of a slave remembering slavery as a practice. Okay. McAfee. Like I said, one was of a slave, but the other individual of distinction that you will notice at the very top is our very own Dr. William Hooper Counsel. Even on the campus of Alabama State, Alabama A&M's most fierce rival, the building that the president of their university walks into every morning is named the William Hooper Counsel Hall. So if we ever lose Magic City Classic again, let's just let them know, well, at least your president walking into our founder's building. Mr. Isaiah already told us where Dr. Counsel was born, where he came from, and these slave traders brought him and his family here to Madison County. Well, this is where Counsel was sold, literally, Green Bottom Inn. This is one of the most famous hotels, not only in Madison, but in the entire country. So much so that 3 U.S. presidents stayed there. Andrew Jackson, James Polk, and James Monroe. Green Bottom Inn had a famous racetrack. They fought gamecocks, but they also sold slaves. And if you can imagine this brick wall here, the sidewalk here, but there was a street where thousands upon thousands of African slaves literally walked and traveled from the Carolinas and the Virginia to be sold here at Green Bottom Inn. Counsel and his family would be sold to the Madison County Judge D.C. Humphreys. Today, this hotel is burned down, but the rock ledge still remains. So where is Green Bottom Inn today? Green Bottom Inn is literally on the campus of Alabama A&M University. You still see the rock ledge still today. So literally, he was sold at the age of 9 and would come back and found a school of higher learning. Now that's a God thing. I'm going to expedite some of this. Counsel was a slave, Civil War is over, blacks now able to receive an education. After 3 years, Counsel would receive formal education and establish a school that we would come to know as Alabama A&M University. He would get involved in politics only to use his political persuasion to establish a school that the taxpayers would pay for the education of Negro education. And this is the first school of Alabama A&M University here, which is currently where the Von Braun is located. But Counsel didn't just select any old school building. Counsel selected the building across the street from his former slave owner, Judge D.C. Humphreys. And this is a picture of Humphreys' house. So literally across the street, he would go and establish a school, just a reminder to his old master. And I know we're pushed for time, but the type of education that Counsel established was one of an academic, well, it's pretty advanced or diverse curriculum, one encompassing of academics, industrial education, as well as a higher education. So students would learn agricultural, engineering, but they also learn how to recite long passages of Shakespeare. They learn Latin. They learn German. They learn how to make mattresses and shoes. So I personally believe as we've progressed, we've forgotten a lot of things. And we've become miseducated, if you will, because I don't know how to make a shoe. And I wish I did. But I digress. Also, council had a group or a quartet that would go and sing along to kind of promote the school. And on these tours, he came across an individual named W.C. Handy. And he would have W.C. Handy to come and be the band director of Alabama A&M College. Well, Handy will come to know as the father of the blues. So literally, before this genre of the blues would impermeate the globe, it was students here who would receive it firsthand. And this is a picture of Handy with A&M Band, and this is a picture of Handy in his older years. We're going to fast forward it. Council was credited as being the first pastor of the St. John AME Church, which is currently located downtown. He was an author. He was an editor of the Herald, one of the first magazines in Huntsville produced by an African American. He was one of the first, probably a suite of the first black lawyers. He was a lawyer in 1883. But one thing known about Dr. Council that's not as common as he was a pioneer in civil rights in this state and across the country. Well, the federal government created laws to protect passengers when riding over trains. Before the Rosa Parks and before we even rode on buses, our main mode of transportation was horse and buggy and train. Well, Dr. Council bought a first-class ticket to ride along trains traveling from Chattanooga to Atlanta. He bought a first-class ticket and sat down in the presence of white men and women. Immediately as he sat down, men working on the railway approached him, "Sir, you have to leave." Well, Council replied, "Well, you sold me a first-class ticket, therefore I'm entitled to this seat." And he sits down. The report says he has his legs crossed, pretty cool demeanor. They go visit the conductor and comes back, with this time with more anger. "Again, sir, you have to leave." Council replies the same statement. "I purchased a first-class ticket, therefore I'm entitled to this accommodation." Without a third warning, the gentleman carrying the lantern smashes Council across the face. Immediately he begins to bleed. Council lunges out of his seats and pow. A huge fight breaks out on the train. They detain Council and they throw him into the colored section. Well, he's a lawyer at this time. And he purposely did this to challenge the system because it was only 6 days after this law had come into effect. He sues the federal government for $25,000. There's a 6-month period waiting the hearing. They didn't award Council any damages, but they changed the law that said if blacks buy a first-class ticket, they have to be treated with equal accommodations. And this was a federal law. This went across the entire country, and it started right here with our very own Dr. Council. 2 months later, students at Alabama A&M would follow in Council's footsteps and also sit in first-class seating. This erupted around the city, and Council was propositioned with 2 options. You can either stay at A&M and we're going to shut down the school, or you can resign and you'll save the school. So Council says, "For the love I have for my race, I give you my resignation and resign June 4th, 1887. To be replaced with this man, Mr. Peter Clark, who would probably be the equivalent of Council, but in Cincinnati, Ohio, to any Ohio fans in here. But this wasn't his school. And men and women joined together, churches, organizations, and they wrote the Board of Trustees to get Council back in office. So literally to the day, June 4th, 1887, Council was out of office for promoting civil rights and social equality. But June 4th, 1888, he was literally back on campus as the principal, and he would remain 32 years until his death. There's so much to say about Dr. Council. He was an international speaker. He even began to get frustrated with what he witnessed, the violence that blacks experienced, and actually he assisted Bishop Henry Turner of the AME Church on a Back to Africa movement. And combined, they brought more Africans in the diaspora or in America back to Africa and the continent than Marcus Garvey did. So he was also a Pan-Africanism. But to speak of his character is to kind of highlight his death. At the time of Dr. Counsel's death, 5,000 people attended his funeral. In the no Twitter, no Facebook age, no cars, really. 5,000 people attended his death, both black and whites. And even the governor of this state's family not only attended his funeral, but also sung a song along his gravesite. It speaks volumes to an ex-slave. And this was reported to saying this was the greatest memorial experienced by an ex-slave anywhere in the South. Thousands upon telegrams will go across the country talking of his death, and it was even reported in the New York Times. But to me, one of the most impactful statements that was made came from the Montgomery Advertiser. And it said, Dr. Counsel was the greatest man of the Negro race, undoubtedly the greatest benefactor of his own people that the Negro race had ever produced. And today, his legacy continues on. To piggyback, and this is my last slide, to piggyback off of James Meredith, who Brandon Pitts played, he highlighted the first person who integrated Ole Miss, or University of Mississippi. Well, here's a picture of two individuals who followed in his steps and integrated the University of Alabama. This is Mr. James Hood, and this is Miss Vivian Malone. Well, Mr. James Hood came from, I believe, Atlanta, and Miss Vivian was educated here. James Hood, he resigned the University of Alabama after 2 months because he said, I'm gonna have a physical and mental breakdown if I continue to stay on this campus. But this strong sister here, Miss Vivian Malone, would stay the course of time and be the very first African-American to receive a bachelor's degree from the University of Alabama. Now, this is the interesting thing. There's a news report that takes counsel making the court in 1874 that he was demanding civil rights, that so much that if his son wanted to attend the University of Alabama, he should be able to do so. Although his son wouldn't attend, he was literally speaking prophetically. And the very first student who would get a bachelor's degree would first be a student at Alabama A&M. So as we continue on our ever progressive march towards equality in America, as a people, let us never forget the roads paved by our ancestors, such as Dr. William Hooper Counsel. Those silent servants who did just as much as any other individual towards the progress of racial advancement, but for whatever reason, time has seemed to have faded their names. But there's an African proverb that says, until lions have their historians, tales of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. So I leave with you today, lions, tell your story. Thank you.